Ho, ho, ho. Welcome to another episode of Ice Ice Beta, a podcast about ice climbing festivals, mixed and dry tooling. And I'm your host, Aaron Gary. It takes a village to raise an ice festival. And for Liz Sahagún and her co organizers, it's all hands on deck for the All In Ice Fest, which will take place from January 5th to the 7th. Entering their third year, the mission of the fest is to create a space where folks from historically marginalized communities can simply have fun ice climbing without having to feel like they're checking a box that defines their identity. As a first generation Mexican American and woman in neuroscience, Liz has spent a lot of time straddling cultures, navigating concepts of identity, and trying to find community in activities she enjoys. To help make ice climbing more accessible, Liz, Claire, Mari, Christina, Rosie, and the rest of the team started All In to help reduce barriers to the sport. They do this by offering low cost clinics and programs to develop as guides, cater to people of all physical abilities, and foster a culture where folks can simply show up and feel welcome. Listen on to hear how Liz first fell in love with mountains, her journey to 30 ice climbing road trip, and how she's developed her self care toolbox. Hey Liz, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi. Yeah, I'm really happy to be a part of this.
I am really happy for you to be here as well, and I'm excited to chat with you because you're doing a lot of really meaningful and important work in the ice climbing space. To kick things off, you're born and raised in California. When did you start getting interested in the outdoors?
Yeah, I'm first generation Mexican American. My parents both moved here from Mexico when they were really young. And so we are somos agricultores. We were farmers culturally. And so they moved and immigrated and they're farm laborers in California. And so my relationship to the outdoors was running around in really big farms, riding bikes up and down country roads. So that's how my relationship with outdoors really started was a pretty big cultural one, but for outdoor recreation was probably when I studied abroad in college.
Where in California was your family, and where were the farms?
So my family moved to the Sacramento Delta area, so small rural town Clarksburg. Um, and I actually just moved back to the area. So it's been, yeah, really cool to be back and kind of be in that space again.
What was the community like growing up? Was it a lot of families like from the same area in Mexico or similar regions? Or
Yeah, yeah. So my dad moved here with his cousins and his friends, and so they kind of our immigrant story is very unique in the sense that their local community was also built in with their immigrant community where they moved to. It's very different than a SoCal narrative because the pressure to assimilate was very different, as in there was less of it, so I still grew up speaking Spanish, and I still knew people from our homelands, and we still go back pretty often, and we would caravan with family friends down, so my parents were able to maintain that relationship, with their culture, and we also grew up with that culture as well.
um, do you want to talk about your time as an undergrad in Chile and sort of how that sparked things for you?
Yeah, I'm the first one to go to college, and I also studied abroad, so I think I might have also been the first one to leave the continent. So I studied abroad in Chile, and I chose Chile because I knew the language, and I wanted to kind of explore my cultural identity a little bit more as someone that originates from Latin America, and to understand how Latin American cultures are similar but also different. So that's why I chose Chile. But then I also really, really got into the outdoors. I was just roaming up and down that country, and I ended up traveling all over the continent. But for me, the most impactful part of that trip was spending, I think it was 3 weeks down in Patagonia, and that was my first time camping, was down there, and it was all just so big and just so beautiful and really, really changed my perspective of what my reality could look like.
Was that in conjunction with just studying abroad as well? I mean, like how much do you chalk up to the mountains? I mean, I'm not saying you have to like dissect it, but just curious like how much like the mountains itself change your trajectory.
I I don't know, that trip was revolutionary for so many reasons because I was down there also during a lot of student protests, and I was living a block away from where students were getting tear gassed and our school got shut down, and so that really, uh, made me rethink a lot of, also like capitalistic values, and how that maybe doesn't align with some of the things that with how I want to live and see the world.
How did that change things for you coming back from Chile and sort of like what you did next?
I think before that I was feeling really restless with my existence. I don't know how else to say that, and just kind of the identity crisis that a lot of us go through in college, and figuring out what we want to do, who we want to be. And so for me, um, coming back, it really revived my love for the outdoors in a different way. Not the little kid running around in like fields anymore. Now I'm running around in mountains. And then really kind of figuring out what next steps for me were going to be career wise. I'm going to finish undergrad eventually. What do I want to do after? So I really started exploring science. So right after I came back, I started looking for opportunities to do research and really kind of explore um, what I wanted to do next with my career. So it was just liberating in that sense too.
Were you studying science undergrad as well?
Yeah, so I studied, psychology in undergrad, and then I really got into neuroscience and figuring out, how we behave, the way that we behave. I still kind of do that, so.
And it also seems to have, continued interest in exploring in mountains because you ended up going to Nepal as well, right?
So the rest of that, so when I came back, I got more into science, continued doing lab work, but then I think the pressure became really hard for me to manage, and I really started struggling with my mental health. And so a year after I finished undergrad, so 2024, I did seek help and I was diagnosed with a mental health disorder. And that I knew I needed help. So that's why I went to go seek support. But what I wasn't realizing was that the diagnosis of a mental health disorder is also really traumatic. For someone to tell you that, sorry, I might cry because I don't really talk about this. Um, but for someone to tell you that the way that you see reality and
Mm.
the way that you exist in the world or the way that you think things are might not be true or healthy. Uh, so I did a lot of work and built out my toolkit to really see what would be possible for me. So a year later is when this trip to Nepal came to be. It's like, what is like the most seemingly delusional thing that I could do that I could probably pull off anyway, and then really test my trust in myself again. Um, so I don't talk about that trip, in that way very often, but that's why it was really impactful for me, was rebuilding that confidence and taking charge of my own narrative again and what is possible for me. And, is my toolkit strong enough for me to do something like this by myself? Because yeah, it's not that many people decide to pack up their bags and go to Nepal by themselves to go hike to Everest Base Camp. Like, that's out there. But for me to do that, it was really empowering, and then that is when I decided that I am ready to go to grad school and to start applying and really start pushing, um, and then living the kind of life that I wanna lead and to have the confidence and trust that I can do it.
So you were in Nepal. What was that experience like, and was there any learnings or takeaways from it? I hate to be so reductive, but
Yeah, no, it was really, really cool. I really love being a solo traveler. I feel like I'm more approachable, and I meet more people than when I'm traveling with a group. So I met some other solo travelers, and I probably got more route beta than most people traveling in groups. Like someone handed me their crampons, and they were coming down, and I was going up, and they were like, "Okay, that part's really icy. I don't think I'm gonna need these. I don't want to carry them." Like I just, that community of solo travelers up and down that path becomes very obvious to solo travelers, and that it also really made me learn how to gather more information for trips, because a lot of people that go with guided groups, they had no idea where their next stop was going to be. They didn't know how much altitude they were going to gain the next day. They were just going to do whatever their guide told them, and so it was really cool for me to be there with my own map, make decisions like, oh, maybe I want to stay here for 2 nights instead of just one, and just that freedom and flexibility, was really cool, and people were really nice. um I will say the part that got weird was that um, I do look pretty like culturally ambiguous. I could look Nepalese, and there were some times where people like tried to treat me like a Sherpa, or or they assumed that I was guiding this nice white woman that I was with one time, and kind of expecting for me to take uh, our order when we stopped at one of the little tea houses and just those kinds of things. But I decided to part ways from her, and I was like, no, this is not the experience that I wanted. And even that was empowering for me to remove myself from a situation where I wasn't, you know, wasn't the experience that I wanted to be. Um, and to be able to talk more with some of the folks in the tea houses too was really cool.
You said upon reflecting about this trip that it empowered you with more tools in your toolbox. And you talked about your ability to be able to extract yourself from a situation that maybe you didn't want to be a part of and the sense of like confidence in going solo. Were there other things that stand out to you now when looking back?
I was journaling a lot during that time. So I think trying to navigate some negative self-talk that I was going through at the time. And I actually ended up journaling most of that way through. And I ended up burning that notebook. And that was also like a really liberating thing where it's like, okay, well, I had my feelings. I, not all positives. There was those doubts trickling into my journal too, and I, figuring out what my narrative was going to be for myself and how I wanted to tell that story to myself. Um, so writing and journaling and kind of accepting my thoughts and feelings as intense or sad or happy as they are, just letting go um, was really cathartic for me.
That's interesting. Um, you did come back after spending time in the Andes and then in the Himalayas. Um, you came back and you went to grad school, or you were applying to grad school then?
Yeah, so honestly, coming back from that was kind of terrifying because it's like, well, what now? I've already been literally as far away from home as I could be by myself because it's exactly across the world. And at that altitude is like as far as I can safely go by myself from my home. It's like, well, what now? So I ended up buying a car and I started doing a lot of road trips by myself. I think that summer after I came back, I think I ended up going to like 15 different national parks in my little Subaru. Um, and then I was starting to apply for PhD programs, and really just accepting this new confidence, and using my toolkit pretty regularly to cope with the really hard environment of being a one of color in academia.
And this intertwines with how you got into ice climbing because you ended up in your PhD at was it Purdue?
Yes, so I moved to Indiana for grad school. And actually one of my really good outdoor friends and we were backpacking a lot. And so we were like, okay, let's try to get into mountaineering. But there are no mountains in the Midwest. So like, well, what can we do? It's like, okay, well, what if we start climbing? It's like, well, what if we start ice climbing? Because that's kind of the more mountaineering related thing close to me in the Midwest.
Where did you end up going ice climbing for the first time?
So ice climbing is really expensive. And I was a first year grad student. So we were really looking for cheap clinics. And so we found a small ice climbing festival in Minnesota. So the Sandstone Ice Fest. And I think it was $100 clinic that included some demo gear. And so my friend and I decided to commit and just show up and see what it was going to be. Um, it was really terrifying because we, you know, pulled up in our rental car really excited, and it was still just mostly dudes uh, out there climbing, and we looked at each other because she's also um, in a lot of male dominated spaces, and so we looked at each other and we're like, "What the hell are we doing here? Like, really, we're gonna go through this again?" Because we don't deal with it enough at work and so many other places of our lives. So we seriously consider just turning around. We were like, "Do we really, really want to do this?" But we're like, "Fuck it, we're here." And, like, this ice park is it's like you could probably belay from a car, because some of the climbs are right there. Maybe that's a little dramatic, but it's just so close. I'm like, it's literally right here. If people are shitty, let's just leave. We can do that. That's in my toolkit now where I can remove myself from a shitty situation where I don't really feel comfortable. So, we can just leave. And we didn't. We we showed up and it was really great. People were really excited to share their sport and, they were really excited that we came from different places because my friend was living in Atlanta and we traveled together a lot. So they were excited that we were there and it was really cool.
I guess maybe this was your first climbing event? I mean, oftentimes people are like, "Oh, climbers are so friendly and, like, enthusiastic, etcetera," but here you were, like, very trepidatious. So I guess I'm just curious where might that have been coming from that, like, your immediate reaction was like, "Nah, nah, dude."
Yeah, so there was just so much going on because I had just started grad school, PhD in neuroscience in the Midwest, and I was at Purdue University right after Trump got elected. Um, and that I think adds a lot of context to how my friend and I were feeling in that space. You know, this little rural town in Minnesota, still relatively recent after the election, was still like, but why?
So, after that event, because you were received pretty positively, like, how did you relate to ice climbing going forward from there, and was that something that you still wanted to do? Obviously, yes, because you did.
Yeah, yeah. So as soon as we got back, we booked our next trip back up to Minnesota to see our friends. And I started looking for my first pair of ice boots and ice tools. So I was like fully committed. That is one thing about me is just like if I am into something, I'm into it. Like 0 or 100. So yeah, I was pretty committed to the suffering of ice climbing pretty quickly.
What did the next, I guess, season or few seasons look like for you in ice climbing?
So that same year, I also went to Michigan Ice Fest and then started doing more climbing out in the Midwest. But I had heard of ice in other places. But the first couple seasons for me were based out of there. Like maybe I went to Colorado once, kind of off season for some late season ice with a friend. But I think where I really started struggling in the sport is when I started getting better at it and then recognizing that just people like the feeling that the way that it felt for me didn't resonate with the people around me, like how big of a deal it is for me to be out there. Um, just people weren't really understanding the significance, and that's where it started feeling really lonely.
You've talked about how you were looking for a community and maybe having some difficulty finding that. So what were you looking for?
So I think, and this is honestly, I can probably identify it more than most people because this is something that I deal with in academia, and there are just a lot of parallels to dealing with male dominated spaces. But I think there are a lot of people out there that are really excited to support you as a beginner, and then they can take credit for your progression and then pat themselves on the back for helping this nice girl out get into ice climbing. But then there's a lot of like weird vibes and retaliation and kind of condescending behavior when you kind of start outgrowing those relationships. And that's where I was starting, and that's where I started feeling tension, honestly even impacted my romantic relationship at the time, because I had capacity to do more because I had that toolkit of, what does this balance look like for me? And I had done a lot of work early on and to be able to have that balance and to try to exist um, with these multiple identities that I was acquiring.
How did you go about finding that community? I know that you did like a big road trip at one point.
Yeah, so I almost quit climbing after one really terrible experience. I think without sharing too much because it is other people's stories, but I witnessed some pretty garbage behavior at an ice climbing festival. And I was just like, I absolutely do not want to be in this space. But then the next day, I was helping coordinate this group of girls that are from the Twin Cities, and they hadn't really spent a night away from home, much less to go ice climbing. And so I spent the day with them. And I don't know if he remembers, but I met Phil Henderson kind of in passing, and we were out there, like we were out there taking up space. And I was like, "Ah, okay, well maybe if I just meet my people, maybe I can commit and stay in it with people that really get it and really understand the impact of me being out here doing this thing." So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll stick to it. And then soon after, COVID happened, literally right after. And then I think during that time, there started being more access to affinity spaces and community online, like on social media. And I was able to connect with some really cool people, and start seeing myself reflected and start recognizing, these are my people. These are the people that are going to understand why this is so impactful for me. And part of that, uh, this is a very long story, but I ended up connecting with Teresa Silveira. She's based out of Oregon, and she was doing a fundraiser. She was going to climb Y East, so Mount Hood, 30 times, and was doing a fundraiser because she was about to turn 30. And then she put out this post that's like, if anyone wants to come climb with me or do mountaineering stuff, like I'm happy to. And then I was like, well, me, can I come visit you? And I have a sister based out of Oregon, and I think I really needed to relocate during that first summer of COVID. The Midwest was just not good for me. So I went and stayed with my sister for a bit, and I started hanging out with Teresa a little bit, and we climbed Mount Shuksan and just really started unpacking the different layers that we really couldn't unpack with anybody else, and that was just magic, to be in that space and for someone to understand the different kinds of, honestly, trauma that start coming up for us and how impactful it is when we do work through it. And so I told her, I was like, I'm going to turn 30 pretty soon. But ice climbing is more my scene. What if I just take a really big road trip and just try to climb with cool people? And she was really excited to support me in that. So I always credit, that journey to 30 back to her, because it was a cool concept. And yeah, so I was teaching remotely. And so I decided to go on a really big road trip. And I ended up going to, my first stop was, um, Montana. And I spent 2, 3, probably 3 weeks there, and I met Claire, who now helps me run the ice climbing festival. I I hung out with, a lot of climbers in that area. I met Matt Zia, and then I met Manoa, and started just connecting with really cool people that were more my vibe, and that didn't really follow those shitty narratives that I had seen in other people. And so just starting to feel safer in that space again was really big for me. And so after Montana, I went down to Utah. I climbed with Nikki Smith. And she's just so cool. And then I ended up going to Ouray. So I went through Colorado, and I went to the ice park and I climbed with Monse and Janelli. And that was the first time that I had climbed with, like, all Latinas, and just that energy was so different. Like we were speaking Spanglish, we were swinging, and like really got into some deep stuff on like how we were feeling and what was coming up for us. And just there's this very weird feeling just once we start really shaking our cultural narratives, it becomes really scary. And so I think to have each other in that support system, um, it yeah was really impactful for me. And then on that trip is when I met Peter O'Neill, the director of the ice park, and we kind of pitched the idea to him to do an event. I was like, okay, well, I've been making a lot of friends. We really want to do a big affinity event. Um, at this point, there had already been some pretty big ones. So Flash Foxy is a big popular one. Uh, there was Color the Crag that happened for a few years in a lot of these spaces. And so we wanted to do something like that for a sport that we love. And so we pitched it to him. He was really excited. He was like, well, how can we support you in this? And part of that too was because there were so many other people that reached out to me, wanting to climb with me for this project that we just couldn't travel because of COVID. I was in my car, like, spending nights by myself in hotels just to try to keep myself isolated. And it was a little safer to be outdoors, but it just, I wasn't comfortable climbing with people that were flying because I had such an itinerary trying to protect myself. So that is the very long story of Journey to 30. But after I ended up going back to Minnesota and I put together a BIPOC ice climbing clinic out in Sandstone and rallied some really cool people. And that's my first time instructing a clinic. And it was really cool for that to come full circle for me. Back in the place where I learned um, was how I wrapped that up. And I think I ended up my goal was to do 30 climbs with 30 underrepresented people, but I think I ended up climbing with 30 folks from underrepresented background and just way more climbs. So I just really fully committed to the climbing that year.
So you alluded to through the journey to 30 that you did, the creation of the All In Ice Fest. Do you wanna talk about what that event is and what its mission is?
Yes. All in Ice Fest is an ice climbing festival designed to support people of historically marginalized groups. And we focus on three main goals. So the first one is expanding the community. So really trying to support people at different skill levels. So not just beginners, but really try to create spaces where people can advance, uh, support professional development, and offering apprentice opportunities and supporting newer up and coming guides of these backgrounds, and then to create a space where we can celebrate our own accomplishments because we don't really see ourselves reflected in a lot of major programs, and so it's like, well, let's just make our own. But there were so many evolutions to this festival, and it took a lot of reflection, and for us, it really comes down to trying to ask the right questions. So, because during this time, there were a lot of affinity spaces being designed and created, but I think there was still this, like, a restlessness for people to feel like they could be their whole selves and not just this identity that identifies with the affinity space. So what I mean is a little bit more of a focus on intersectionality. Um, and so, I'm not just a person of color. I'm a Latina and I am a woman. Like that has so many layers that mean a lot to me in my identity. And so it's just doesn't really do me justice as a person for me to just, be a checkbox of am I BIPOC? Okay, then yes, you belong in the space. Like that is just not the approach that we wanted to take for this festival because we are whole people with multiple identities and there are just so many layers to our existence. There was a call with Claire, then we were just terrified. We're like, do we really like? What are we gonna call it? She's just like, just let's just go all in. And I was like, wait, I think we can swing it. Like I think that works. And so we kind of going back a little bit. So we were both part of the original group for the Scarpa Athlete Mentorship Initiative, and that also really gave us that support system to dream big, which is a big thing for me to find support for big dreams like that. And so yeah, that um, gave us a really strong foundation to organize something like this. And we chose Ure specifically um, because of the accessibility. There are very few places really in the world where you can just set up a top rope and climb. And there are just so many different climbing areas of varying skill levels, and we do have capacity to take folks into the backcountry. And we can support people in different parts of their guiding career as well. So we don't need to be full alpine guides to guide and instruct in the ice park. And I think that was really big for us too, because then we can support more guides that are working on developing those skills.
Before we talk about the first event and the reception, you actually made a really interesting note in our initial call about how the outdoor industry loves oh, what was it? Checkboxes? Was that how you put it? Um, how have you addressed that with the All In?
I think people are understanding that our strategy is working, but it was really hard for us to go to sponsors and be like, no, this isn't a POC event. No, this isn't specifically for adaptive climbers. No, this isn't specifically for queer climbers. And like, you know what? Yeah, maybe we are open to people with different identities, like, because then that doesn't really help them figure out where their numbers are and who they're supporting. So I feel like, there was a lot of hesitation to support us. And it's like, well, how are you going to create equity if you don't know exactly who is from what background? It's like, well, that's the point. Because even within these communities, there are different levels of marginalization. And we need to make sure to take a fully equitable approach. We really want to focus on intersectionality and who are the most marginalized people, are the people that would check all three, but even still, that can mean something totally different for different people. So, for the way that we um, kind of push back against that, it's very reductionist of our identities to just ask us to check a box. So ours is an open-ended question for our registration. It's like, do you identify as somebody from a historically marginalized group? Please elaborate. And it's really beautiful to see how much people are excited to share about themselves or even how little. You could just answer yes and we're like, okay, cool. We trust you. That means something to you. And so that is, I think, I think it sets the tone for the festival because there isn't this expectation that you have to be a certain persona. You can just exist.
How did the first event go?
It was really scrappy, but it was really fun. Like that is the best way to put it because there was a really, really big rise in COVID rates that winter and especially in Ure and we're just constantly winging it is what it felt like and really changing our priority to the safety of participants. Health wise, when we were expecting to focus on a different aspect of safety, more kind of community focused, really to, okay, let's make sure that we have tests for people. Let's make sure that people are vaccinated when they come and really focusing on health because we are people that are disproportionately affected by COVID. So really making sure that we're not adding to the crisis.
With that context, once people were there, how did the event go?
It was magic. It's really hard to explain that kind of energy because none of us had experienced anything like that before. But I think feeling like we could let our guard down a bit and just experience joy. And honestly, it just I'm so happy that I'm part of this, but it's also so sad and frustrating that we don't get those opportunities more often to just exist and do fun shit um, without there being this grander thing of pressure or expectations or struggle. But I think that is why it's so impactful. It's like it really can be that powerful to just show up and have fun because so many of us carry so many things with us all the time. Um,
You talked about how it can be challenging just to have experiences of just pure joy just for the sake of the experience and the sport. And maybe not to share other people's experiences, but would you be willing or could you talk to some of the joyful experiences that you were seeing with participants? I'm curious if anything in particular stands out to you as like really representative.
I mean, it's as simple as a participant coming in and trying to go to the bathroom and realize that they don't have to make a decision between a male or a female bathroom. That either there's a toilet and then there's a toilet with urinals. And I think for that joy for them to be like, oh, okay. Like there's joy in those moments before we even get to the ice climbing, but also just the joy when someone realizes they don't have to hike way into the park with their mobility device. We can set them up and figure something out for them to climb in the demo wall without having to make that really long hike that's going to exhaust them. Or for one of our deaf participants to know that we just have ASL interpreters. Like they don't need to help us coordinate with their friend who can make it one day. Like we can just offer those opportunities and just relieve them of that pressure that they're usually under in those spaces, where they can just, getting people to the same starting point where they can just have fun. there's just so much joy and laughter and people just having a good time, um, is just really powerful, and that energy is felt throughout the entire park. Like, the ice farmers love us, people are psyched, that we're there, but what we're really trying to do with this festival is to try to build critical mass to get to the point where this just has so much momentum and it just becomes normal. For us, we do have now our more normal. It's like we already know we need to do this, this, and this, and this, and this. And we're still trying to ask the right questions, and to set an example. But ideally, we do have the capacity to have joy in other spaces, and we do have the momentum with staff or, um, building those connections with other ice festivals. And we do have a really strong relationship with the Uri Ice Park, and we're building relationships together. So they've invited some of the folks that they've met from our festival to Uri to be speakers, participants, guides. So I think we are starting to be part of a really big, meaningful change that we really, really want to see.
You stated that one of your three pillars is professional development. So why is helping to support more guides, more guide representation? Why is that an important part of the puzzle?
The dream, really the big picture dream, would be for All in Ice Fest to be a traveling festival. But to do that, we really, really need guide staff that has those more advanced guiding accreditation experience, and we're just not there. And so that that goal came about for that reason. We were trying to figure out a venue, and it's like, well, who can instruct and guide, and what is a good space for our guides to learn and grow, and yeah, just realizing that we are limited uh regionally by that, and it's like, well, how can we get people there? How can we support more guides? And so this year we did a guide retreat. So that was really fun. It was our first time doing something. So we partnered with Moxie and the Ice Park to put together a guide development program in Red Rocks in Vegas, and that was really, really powerful. I mean, obviously because we're supporting different types of guides, but also just the conversations that we were having on how to support each other and realizing how much overlap there is between our community needs was was really um really cool for us.
You've talked about how it can be hard just to find time for yourself to go climbing. Ooh, your eyes just lit up. Oh gosh. Uh, where are you at in your climbing now? And do you have some climbs that you're hoping to go after this winter season? Or
Yeah, so a really big wrench in my season so far was that I okay, so part of I'm gonna rewind for a second. So part of my pretty aggressive self-care is to be really intentional with my time and things that I do for myself, whether it's making time for me to do my nails because you know what? Yes, I can be selfish for an hour. Or something big like this year, I decided to go to my first Formula One race in Mexico City. I was like, I'm going to treat myself to this trip. But during that trip, I ended up getting hit by a car, and my knee is mostly fine, but I still haven't fully been able to exercise or continue training for anything. So that might be a wrench in my season, but I'm making a lot of progress, and I think I should be able to climb by all in, but there's still some nerve there are some nerve issues that I don't know how my foot's gonna react in cold temperature again and being crammed into ski boots or mountain boots.
I had no idea. Wow. Because you mentioned that you were running a lot before, so I had no concept of that. Well, that sort of dovetails into just this question that I'm kind of eager to hear your response to, which is how do you balance all of your different commitments? You're, running all in, you're doing a lot of things. And so just curious how you balance it with self-care as well.
Oh my gosh, I feel like a lot has changed since our last call. But at that trip to Mexico City and to have it be such a chaotic and beautiful trip at the same time, uh, kind of really triggered an existential crisis for me. But how do I balance? Yeah, it's constantly reevaluating and checking in with myself and trying to be self-aware. Is this serving me? Is this where I want to be? Am I who I want to be? Going really, really deep with the intentionality and self-exploration.
You were the first person in your family to get a bachelor's and to get a master's and then get a doctorate, and coming as a first generation Mexican American. And I guess what does that all mean to you?
So I will say that's something that I've really been working on unpacking, that I tend to disassociate uh, kind of different parts of myself as a coping mechanism, and it's not the healthiest to try to compartmentalize. But I think lately I've been in a better space where I can kind of understand the impact of all that I do. But I think really for me it is that it's made me really comfortable exploring and navigating unknown spaces, and just the liberation of being in a more privileged position where I can make different life choices for myself and trying to make the best of it for myself, and also increase the impact that I have in the world. Um, which, yeah, it seems like wildly ambitious. I mean, it is wildly ambitious, and it's not something that I just woke up and did. Like, I've mentioned all the way from undergrad and being that rowdy little kid trying to, wreak havoc on the world. So it feels like a pretty natural progression, um, for me, even though, there aren't that many people like us celebrated, and I think a lot of us do try to stay more in the background, just because there is a lot of generational trauma that we're also working on healing from, because those of us that do become more visible usually deal with a lot of retaliation. So that's kind of that double-edged sword of, it is really liberating, but I'm also putting myself in a very vulnerable situation by being so open and honest. And it also it also means that I really understand how important it is to have a strong support system. And I've mentioned that yes, I'm the first one to get all these degrees, but I'm also the first one that didn't find my life partner by the time I'm 20. And I'm still single. I've been single for 4 years. I really struggled with my dating life because I do so much and I carry so much with me. And um, so I've really had to design a support system that works for me. Non-romantic relationships, uh, and that is also why I think spaces like All In are so impactful, because that is where you can go connect with those people that are going to be part of that support system forever. And that is what motivates me, because I did find my people, as I mentioned, like connecting with those folks on my journey to 30. They're all still part of my support system, and having more honest conversations about how we are feeling, and just the overlap across people with different backgrounds. It's like, you know, my physical climbing experience is very different than an adaptive athlete trying to figure out how to, use gear in a way that works for them. Um, but we are also kind of dealing with similar things in the back of our minds on how are people perceiving us? How safe is it for me to get there? Just those kinds of things. And I think the more that we come together and realize that we also have a lot in common in those kinds of narratives, and trying to change some of that negative self-talk and try to empower each other to show up and figure out how we can support each other to make that process safer, is kind of where for me it comes, big picture. And I'm really grateful to have a strong support system, and we're all just trying to figure it out together.
It takes a village to raise an all-in ice fest.
It really does.
So do you do you want to give a shout out to your support system?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, honestly, everyone in the All In team, um, and it's really interesting. So yeah, our All In meetings are really fun. It's nice to check in and see all of our friends, and to check in and see how we're doing. But we're all really tired, and so I think the advice that I've given, and I think we're all trying to really rally on lately, is I burn out when I'm at 100%, to try to do any one thing at 100%, because I do so much. Um, but I have also learned to be really productive and intentional, and have that toolkit to get shit done, and what that looks like for me. So I think if I'm functioning like 50 to 70% capacity at any given time, then I think that's kind of the vibe that we're all starting to take. And I'm just really freaking grateful to have uh, a team that's so psyched and productive, and they're all just so great. When we're at 50 to 70. So just, imagine if there was that investment. If we could all just quit our jobs and do this, like that would be so impactful. Um, but yeah, that's my little rant on that.
Said it once, we'll say it again. This is the question that we always end on. If you were to give your younger self one piece of beta, could be for climbing, could be for life, could be anything, what would that be?
Okay. I think for me, it's going to be don't forget to breathe. Because I do so much all the time. Um, just like just stop and breathe, and like that allows you to take it all in. That allows you to meet your basic needs, right? You need air to continue. And I give that advice to so many people. Like there was um yeah, one of the junior scientists that I work with, she did her first big presentation, and I could see her like starting to get that riled up, and it's like, don't forget to breathe. So that's something that I didn't really do very well.
Given all that you and your team do, if listeners want to support the All in Ice Fest, how can they do so?
We are partnering with the Erie Ice Park for a fundraiser, so we are going to have some items up for auction, and we do have a direct donation link, and we are going to have some events in different places. But yeah, I think the biggest thing for folks is just the resources, so people can donate, because we are doing really high impact work. We're out here really changing lives, and the fact that we do have folks that come back and bring whole crews with them. Like we have a ton of partnerships this year. And it's just, we're growing, and we really need that support to get to that point of critical mass where this can just be a sustainable thing that lives on forever.
Well, thank you very much, Liz, for being on.
Yeah, this was fun.
If you're interested in attending or volunteering, you can register at allin, icefest.com. That is allinicefest.com. They have a sliding scale option for event and clinic fees. And if you'd like to support the organization, there is a donation link that we will share in the show notes.